Welcome to my first quarter of the year reading wrap up. That is the title in progress. Since the beginning of this year, I have just been reading whatever I feel like. I've been mood reading. I thought I'd get back in the book content with a little bit of a reading wrap up. Let's get into it. I do have 2 5 stars in this lineup. So I've already got 2 5 stars for the year down. I feel really good about that. The first book that I read, it actually was a little bit before Christmas. That was The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I technically DNF'd it. So I feel like I'm really bad at describing books. So I'm just gonna read the blurb and kind of delve into it a little bit. This is written by a psychologist who mostly specializes in PTSD. And it's kind of about how trauma, PTSD, life impacts our body and it's the way it works. The effects of trauma can be devastating for sufferers, their families, and future generations. Here, one of the world's experts on traumatic stress offers a bold new paradigm for treatment, moving away from standard talking and drug therapies and towards an alternative approach that heals mind, brain, and body. The tone of this book is very clinical and very cold. It is really quite hard to get into, especially if I'm quite the fiction reader. I can delve in and out of non-fiction, but it was very difficult to read. It makes sense. He kind of gets into in the beginning of the book PTSD, especially on Vietnam War veterans and how they're just not the same after they've experienced war and how it impacts their body, their mind, their relationships, how trauma affects everything. And a lot of people had recommended this to me because if you don't know, I do suffer from chronic pain. So I did dive into this just to read about it. It does get quite repetitive because the beginning of the book is, so far what I've read is very much anecdotal experiences, PTSD in his clients. And I know it will get interesting, but I had to put it down. It is quite a thick book, and I think that I'm gonna approach it in the way that I approached another self-help book that was Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by, what's his name? He's quite controversial these days, I can't remember his name. Basically, I picked that up throughout different years of my life when I felt like I wanted to do a little bit of self-help reading, and I picked up different things from it in those different stages. So I think I'm gonna do the same with this book. It is DNF'd for now. If I'm craving a more mind, body, spirit approach to my situation in life, will pick up this book again. So coming from that, the second book that I read this year was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I wanted something a little bit fun. This I read over the New Year period and into the new year. So I wanted something a little bit lighthearted, love a mystery every now and then. This book is about another therapist. So basically, Alicia Berenson lived a seemingly perfect life until one day 6 years ago when she shot her husband in the head 5 times. Since then, she hasn't spoken a single word. It's time to find out why. It's about a psychologist who is quite obsessed with this woman and the case. She hasn't spoken a word since, as the blurb said, even to her detriment. So even in her court case, she just remained silent. Therefore, she did end up being put in a psychiatric hospital. So basically, he starts working at this new hospital even though he's at the peak of his career, and it's considered a little bit of a shitty hospital to go to in the peak of your career, just so he can get close to Alicia Berenson because he wants to be the one to make her speak. I think I rated this low when I finished it. I think I rated it 3 stars, which might not be low to some people, because I felt like the twist, there was a double twist situation. It just kind of didn't have me floored. I kind of saw where the story was leading me, so it wasn't quite a surprise. But in hindsight, I actually did really enjoy this book. I like books that have elements of obsession. I think it excites me reading from a point of view of someone who is obsessive, and I find that makes an interesting thriller when the main character is imperfect and you can kind of see through the cracks. I'm very critical when I go into a mystery because I'm kind of prove it to me, prove me, show me your twist, what have you got? This one, it was a predictable twist, but I think it was a really enjoyable read at the end of the day. That was my first proper read of the year. I think it was a nice tone. Mystery is always a page turner. It got me going. Next was another DNF. If you follow me or if you've seen any of my videos before, I'm a big fan of DNFing books because I find when I don't and I try to push through, it gets me in a reading slump and I don't read for like 5 years. So the next book that I read was Our Wives Under the Sea, and I can't remember who wrote it, by Julia Armfield. This book is about a couple and one of them is like a deep sea philanthropist. I could be wrong. Marine biologist maybe, but she basically studies the sea, and she goes on this expedition in a submarine, and from what I gathered from what I read, there's like some incident that happens, like it's an accident, they are trapped underwater for quite a while, and her wife returns and she is not the same. She's acting weird, her body's doing weird things, her gums are bleeding, like her paws are very strange. So we're led to believe that something mysterious is going on with her, something sea creature related. But I was really bored. It is the slowest moving book I have ever read. I think I read like probably 15-20%, and I also hated the relationship. Even the parts that like from before, like the parts that the memories they were recounting before the incident, this relationship was not a good one. Like the way that the wife who isn't obsessed with the sea and a marine biologist talks about her wife, I was like, that's disgusting. That's not how you like she actually was constantly putting her down for her interests. And afterwards, when her wife was being a little bit weird, she was like the most bitter. She was so bitter towards her wife. And I was like, okay, like obviously, like in my personal experience, if my wife had gone through something deeply traumatic, I probably wouldn't be such a selfish bitch about it. So I really was not enjoying the tone. I was like, this relationship doesn't feel real to me. They don't seem like they like each other, let alone love each other. That element kind of lost me a little bit. I was like, I don't feel like this was a good relationship, so I don't really care where we end up. I'm not really rooting for them. I'm not. And also like the narrative was not dropping any Easter eggs. So it was like, oh, like this is happening, she's acting so weird, but we weren't like getting any crumbs. Like I was like, please just give me a crumb so I can continue, but I wasn't getting any crumbs, and I eventually was like, I don't want to read this anymore. I'm really bored. And I think I looked up the synopsis, like I googled like what actually happened, and it ended up not being anything that spectacular. Like I can't even remember. So I was like, thank fuck I DNF'd that, because if I had held on and kept going and that was the result, I would have been really pissed off. So that was my DNF of my first proper DNF of the year. But then we moved on to a 5-star. I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This is quite the hot commodity this year, I feel, in literature, and I really loved it. Obviously I rated it a 5-star. So deep underground, 39 women live imprisoned in a cage, watched over by guards. These women have no memory of how they got there, no notion of time, and only vague recollections of their life before. As the burn of electric light merges day into night and numberless years past, a young girl, the 40th prisoner, sits alone and outcast in the corner. But soon she will show herself to be the key to the others' escape and survival in the strange world that awaits above them. I was actually very nervous to start this book because my thing is, I love dystopian, hate fantasy. I really struggle to get into fantasy books now. I was so scared this was giving a little bit like sci-fi. I don't mind like little bits of sci-fi, but I was really worried that this was going to be a little bit too far-fetched for me. I'm not great when it comes to like, there's a genre for it. It's left me. I was really worried that it was going to end up being something I don't enjoy, but luckily I like it. It definitely was giving a little bit more on the dystopian side of things, which I appreciate. The narrative is told to us by the youngest girl in the bunker, and she has never known life before the bunker. So it is a really unique perspective to have compared to all these other women who have just kind of acclimatized to the situation that they're in. And it was actually really refreshing, and I just found I love reading from perspectives of like young women. Now that I'm older, I feel like the beauty of like their naivety is something to admire, and also just the way she experienced things in life from such a different perspective because she did not know otherwise. It was really refreshing, and it made me just be like, oh, like we're so lucky to be alive. In the context of like the sci-fi dystopian thing, we never really find out where they are, and like they're definitely not on planet Earth, but we don't know where or why. But I feel like that was the beauty of the book as well. Like there was a lot of unknown, unanswered questions by the end of it, but I think it was the journey, her journey, that was to be admired rather than figuring out what was actually going on. So that was my first 5-star of the year. I really recommend it. It's very quick to get through. The next book I read, I enjoyed, but it wasn't the best thing I've ever read. So I did ultimately rate it a 3 stars. So this was Cultish. Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell. She is very famously known for her book Word Slut. And I kind of had a really brief and short interest in linguistics this first half of the year, but it was very short-lived. I actually did kind of just skim through the rest of this book, so I could have really enjoyed it, but I basically listened to this on audio at work just to kind of pass the time, but it was really interesting. So it basically breaks down the language of like cultish language, words and slang, and how they came to be. It was very, very, very interesting. She basically goes into all the different cults and like how they influence language today. Like for example, one thing that really caught me was drinking the Kool-Aid. Like that's like such a popular saying, and it derives from the cult with Jim Jones. I think it was like Jonestown, how like he convinced everyone to drink this Kool-Aid, essentially cordial mixture, in like an act of like suicide. And like it's like the largest mass casualty event before 9/11 in America. I can't remember. I wish I knew the statistics and like I had a brain that remembered it. But basically that's where that saying came from. Like you're drinking the Kool-Aid. Like you're subscribing to the cultish behavior of like Jonestown and the whole massacre that surrounded that. Their influence on the language today, which also leads us to like in everyday culture these days, especially on like Instagram with trends, like cult favorite beauty products. And it's just like the influence of language in getting people to subscribe to something. So I rated this at 3 stars because like towards the end I was like, okay, yeah, like I get it. Like, I don't know, there was something like missing for me in the end there. Like I kind of just like flicked through it. Yeah, but I would be very interested to read more from Amanda Montell. I know she has some very popular books out there, and I felt it was like definitely changed my perspective on a few different things. I enjoyed it. The next book is my next 5-star read of the year. I had a couple goals for my reading this year, and one of those was to read my first Sally Rooney. I have watched Normal People, but I never read any of her books before, so I said this year is going to be the year I read a Sally Rooney, and I picked Conversations with Friends, and I loved it. It's about 2 couples that kind of intertwine. There's a big theme of infidelity, but let me read you the blurb just so you know what I'm talking about. Frances is 21 years old, cool-headed and observant, a student in Dublin and an aspiring writer. At night she performs spoken word with her best friend Bobby, who used to be her girlfriend. When they are interviewed and then befriended by Melissa, a well-known journalist who is married to Nick, an actor, they enter into a world of beautiful houses, racious dinner parties, and holidays in Brittany. But when Frances and Nick unexpectedly get closer, the sharply witty and emotionally averse Frances is forced to honestly confront her own vulnerabilities for the first time. Sally Rooney is so good at conjuring up a perfectly imperfect character. I loved Frances so much. I just felt like she was shown in such a flawed and vulnerable light. Like I loved reading from her perspective, especially as she is described as more of like a wallflower. She isn't the one to, you know, be confident, the loudest person, the brightest person in the room, but she still has her beautiful qualities. So it's about Frances and her ex-girlfriend, and they're kind of like, they're like still like never really like, they still have unfinished business, and then them getting intertwined with this married couple. And I just fucking loved it. I don't know what it is, like her writing was so entertaining. I'm not one to like be really that into like smut and like sexual scenes, but like the sex scenes in this were really good. And the endometriosis rep, I did not know going into this that there was gonna be endo rep, but wow, was it on point. I felt so seen reading that. I definitely won't be watching the show though, so I know they have made a show out of it and that Joe Alwyn is Nick in this scenario, and that really upsets me and it really makes me angry because Nick in the book is meant to be this intimidatingly hot person, and I look at Joe Alwyn and I'm like, intimidatingly hot? I just don't look at him and get those feelings. Like, it really upsets me that he was cast as that. But I feel like Jemima Kirk, yes, I get it. But I don't know, I just don't really have the interest in watching the show, especially because like I've fallen so in love with the book versions of them. And I just thought it was a beautiful story. So like down to earth. People just making mistakes, but beautiful things coming from these mistakes. It just really was like a slice of life for me. I loved it, and I will be reading more Sally. All right, the next book that I read was also a DNF, and I feel a little bit embarrassed about this one. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This was another one that I put on my 2025 goals. I wanted to read a Donna Tartt, like The Secret History, something that's quite the iconic book. It's basically about like this aristocratic group. I think they kill someone, and like the main character is kind of an outsider that gets into this group. Anyways, I felt like the writing was a little bit pretentious. I feel like it's supposed to be pretentious, but also like I was annoyed that like I wasn't vibing with the pretentious writing. Like it made me feel like I was stupid. Well, not stupid, but like I just didn't like the writing style. Maybe I need to read The Goldfinch instead. That's another classic, but I don't know, it just wasn't catching my attention. They started off with like a murder, and I could vividly like see all the characters so clearly. Like I felt like I was imaginatively there in the story, but it was just missing something. Like it was the main character, like I was just like missing, it wasn't gripping me, and I was bored reading it, unfortunately. And I don't know if that's because I'm just not getting it. I don't know. I was a bit bored reading that one, so she got DNF'd. And then the last book that I read recently was, oh God, what's it called? Was Shari Frankie's book, The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom. I feel like there's not many people out there who don't know the situation that she has come from. So her mother was a YouTuber, and they were like family vloggers. Ultimately kind of got sucked into this, like, I feel like she literally got folie with her family therapist. I feel like I don't have to explain it. A lot of people know like what's happened with Ruby Frankie and the abuse that she put her poor children through at the hands of herself and her therapist, lover, situation, Jodie. But it was so well written. Like Shari, I believe she's always wanted to be a writer, and I could really hear that in her writing. I obviously like went into it wanting to know more about her experience and like the conversation of, you know, family vlogging not being legal. I don't know if legal is like the word, but it was just so interesting to hear her experience, like the whole experience from her perspective, and like how, oh my God, people just get into the craziest situations. You learn more about Ruby, explains how things came to how they were, and I really appreciated it. Like her role in her family, it was so interesting to read about. Like she basically got into the different types of trauma responses, like how the most common ones are obviously like fight or flight. Let me get them all up. Like I feel like as much as I wanted to learn about the situation, I actually was educated on like trauma of the situation that she was in. Types of trauma responses. Yeah, she's like, everybody knows fight, flight, freeze, but she was fawn, and I didn't know about that. And that was kind of like, it's kind of like a mixture of like people pleasing and just being complicit to avoid conflict. It was really interesting to hear about how she approached that situation, and I just think it was so well written. She definitely will make an impact with this book. I rated it 5 stars, but I don't like to focus on star ratings when it comes to like memoirs and like people's life. It feels a little bit like I'm rating your life. It was just really awful to hear what she was put through, and like that's not even the worst that her kids endured, you know, like it was pretty awful. I also then watched the Disney docuseries after as well with my partner, and it's just so awful. It made me so emotional, but I definitely recommend reading her book. It was a great perspective, and as I said, yeah, she did a great job at educating alongside telling her story. So that's my reading wrap up. I hope that you got some recommendations out of this, maybe, and I hope that you can let me know what you've been mood reading in the comments. And I've got 2 books already on the go currently post all of these books, so I feel like I'm having such a good start to the reading year, and I'm feeling excited. Thank you for watching.